All right, we are live.
We're live. Oh, splendid. All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy Sunday. It is November 24, 2024, 11/24/24. We are getting close to Thanksgiving as Americans across this country start thinking in a more thankful mode. We are continuing our sessions on the discussion of the Bible. And more importantly, we're very happy to have with us Peter and Eileen, who have both been hosting sessions at 2 p.m. So we're 11 a.m. now. We're going to have another session at 2 p.m. They're hosting sessions at 2 p.m. to speak on the Old Testament of the Bible. And this week's topic for this morning is Preface to the Bible on the Revelations of God. Now, the revelations of God are progressive and universal, serving the evolving needs of humanity across ages. This principle of progressive revelation underscores that divine guidance is revealed in stages addressing the unique challenges of each era. As Baha'u'llah affirms, every age has its own needs, and the teachings of the manifestations of God serve as the remedy for the ailments of their time. The prophets and chosen ones of God reflect his attributes and act as conduits for humanity to attain the presence of God. Through them, the limitless meanings of God's word unfold, offering spiritual solutions to worldly problems. Baha'u'llah also reveals that divine guidance extends beyond specific religious laws to a universal revelation, visible in all creation, testifying to God's inner light. These teachings invite us to engage deeply with sacred writings, seeking their hidden wisdom to advance not only personal understanding, but the collective progress of civilization. The Universal House of Justice continues this progressive mission, applying divine principles to contemporary issues, ensuring the spiritual and material well-being of humanity. Now, this is not the first session, so we definitely recommend you take a look at last week's session. But nonetheless, we also want to encourage you to go to clearwaterbahais.org, where you can view materials that are via hyperlink available for you to view and download. With that also said, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube or Facebook. The Clearwater Baha'is YouTube channel will have these videos saved so you can watch them. If this is your first time jumping into this subject, we also recommend you look at the previous videos with Peter and with Miss Eileen Maddox. Now, with that being said, welcome, Peter. Welcome, Eileen. We're so happy to have you both today. Hopefully, it's not too cold over there, Peter. I see you got that huge jacket on, like an Eskimo jacket. Is it like really cold over there in California? Snowing hard?
Yeah, it's not snowing. It's just cold.
Oh, wow. Just wait for it to snow then, huh? It's gonna get even colder. Oh, you've
No,
muted
it won't
yourself.
get that much
There we
colder because I turn on the heat. The heat's not on in this room.
go.
So
Okay.
it's about the same temperature as outside.
All right. Well, the heat is coming. Yes. So with that said, are we gonna be sharing PowerPoint slides to put up on the screen?
No, we're just gonna be talking.
All right. So we're ready to go then. Thank you.
You're welcome. Welcome. So I wanted to open this by inviting Eileen when she wishes. It could be here at the beginning or it could be at the end to talk a little bit about the the Pentateuch study program that we're doing. And maybe if she wishes to show a preview or so of what we plan to do today in the class. Because that's really one of the major purposes that I've had in scheduling these talks prior to our course, so that we can do a preview and we can prepare people to well, inspire them to want to come to our presentation. So Eileen, you could either start us off or, you could close us out. Up to you.
Okay, I can start us off. Today, I'm going to be tracing the progress of justice and moral law from the Code of Hammurabi through Abraham and through Moses. And that will be a major program which will show you a tremendous break in human spirituality and the development of a more moral society. And then Peter is going to talk about Cain and Abel, Enoch, Noah, and maybe more. And he's always fascinating. So we will see you later in about 3 hours, a little less. Take it back, Peter.
Very good. Thank you, Eileen. So I had an inspiration this morning that I wanted to try something quite different from what I've ever done before. And that is to put myself in the position of helping people answer questions that they have and they haven't had answered by anybody else, or maybe they have, but it wasn't really to their satisfaction. And the reason why I thought of this was because this is exactly the position in which Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi put themselves. And I think it's actually the position that Baha'i teacher needs to be. We need to be serving the needs of those people we're speaking with, not our own needs. Our purpose is not to pontificate. It's not to just go off on long tirades of what we think is important. It's rather to respond to the questions, the concerns, and frankly, the worries sometimes of the people around us. Baha'u'llah, in so many of his epistles, is addressing specific topics that were brought up by somebody either in conversation or a letter that he's responding to. Abdu'l-Baha, as we know, he did exactly the same thing. Hundreds, thousands of letters that he sent out to people that were responses to their questions. And sometimes deeply personal things about dreams, about relationships with intimate friends and family members, and what profession to choose or what not to choose. And the same thing with Shoghi Effendi. And Shoghi Effendi received so many letters that most of his letters had to be answered by secretaries in order for him to be able to get anything done. And so we're very grateful that he had these secretaries do this on his behalf. So I wanted to put myself in the position of because it's always happened anytime I've ever given a talk. People have questions and not everybody has time to get their questions even asked, let alone answered. And also because I think that probably when it comes to a subject like the Bible, people have really deep questions that that have been answered for them for many years. Now you might forget them, but they might come back. And so that's what I really wanted to do more than anything, is invite you to bring up any matters that have occurred to you over the years that you found to be puzzling and difficult to understand, and that you'd like to have an opinion on them. And, of course, I'm separating myself from the central figures and from the guardian. I'm just giving you my understanding. I'm not giving you something like anything comparable in terms of its lack of error. I'm a human being like you are. I make all kinds of mistakes, probably more. But I do know a little bit about this subject, and I might be helpful, particularly because I've studied it from the Baha'i perspective and also from the Islamic perspective. Just to give you a little background on me, I taught courses for the Wilmot Institute for about 10 years. And that included the first course on Baha'i theology that was ever presented by the Wilmot Institute. I also taught a course on the Bible. I taught a course on Jesus and on the Gospels. Brand new courses again. I had to come up with the syllabus and then lead the discussions. So it really challenged me to do a lot of deep study and to learn from the other people who were taking those courses. And then as far as Islam, I studied at the University of Chicago. I started a graduate program there and did a whole lot of reading and study, and then since then consultation with Baha'is who have made Islam their central focus of study, and including what the Quran says about the Bible and says about particular personalities and issues in the Bible. So with that said, I'm available for you to ask questions. And if you don't ask questions, then I'll just have to talk, right? Because we don't want to have silence here. Although a little bit of silence might be nice for people to reflect. I'm going to wait until I see a hand raised before I'm going to ask that. I will ask as soon as there's a hand raised that Jeremiah recognize you, unmute you. All right. And then when you're unmuted, then we'll hear your question. And by the way, the question could be a comment. Doesn't have to be a classical question. It could be a comment. It could be, let's say, a query that is deeper than having one particular subject. It could be multifaceted. So with that, I turn it over to you, and the first person who raises their hand will get my full attention. Olga.
Hello, Peter. Does the question have to be about the Bible, or can I ask about Christians?
You can ask about anything. And the reason why I say that is because of the wonderful introduction that John gave, in which he talked about we must be anxiously concerned with the needs of the time in which we live, which is, of course, a direct quote from Baha'u'llah. And so all things are interrelated. The study of the Bible is just one of the many things that is of concern to us. So please ask away with whatever you wish.
If a person is a dedicated Christian, but they're not a seeker, does it make sense to talk to them about progressive revelation, or is it a waste of time?
So my answer to you is, first of all, Baha'u'llah teaches not just progressive revelation, but also he teaches universal revelation. Both teachings are found in the Kitab-i-Agan. In universal revelation, he talks about all things created by God are revealing his names and attributes. So, of course, Christians have a very strong sense of that, that they believe that there are miracles happening all the time. They believe that There are many things, everything in the world really is reflecting the glory of God. They believe this very sincerely. So yes, of course, that teaching of Baha'u'llah they can relate to initially. Now, as far as progressive revelation, this is an interesting point. Progressive revelation is demonstrated in Christianity itself and in the discourses of Jesus, because Jesus talks about how very originally, for example, just to give you one example, he says in the beginning, it was designed that marriage would be between one man and one woman, and this would last for life. This was the intention of God. And then he said, because of the hard-heartedness of the people, that this law of marriage was changed. And so it allowed for divorce and it allowed for multiple marriages. But he said, the true, if we go back to the original revelation, it was intended to be between two people for the purpose of having children and having an ever-advancing civilization. So, but in many cases, there are references to this principle that revelation between the time of Moses and the time of Jesus had changed, that there were new imperatives now. There was a new state of consciousness that needed to be addressed by Jesus. So progressive revelation is very much relatable to a Christian, but you must find examples in the Bible. You can't quote the Quran, you can't quote the Baha'i writings, you can't quote the Hinduism or Buddhism or whatever, because they don't believe in those scriptures. You have to quote what they already believe. This is the method that Abdu'l-Baha used every single time when he spoke with somebody. He's always speaking to their knowledge, to their understanding, because what you're trying to do is create a bridge between where they are and Baha'u'llah's insight. And this is best done by starting with their whatever religion they have, whatever faith they have. So yes, you can talk about these things, and one of the things you can talk about also is the power of the Holy Spirit. This is something that Christians have a pretty good strong understanding of, and Baha'u'llah talks about it. He talks about it, for example, in all of his references to teaching and the gleanings. He says that when you are teaching a soul, you must rely on the concourse on high. You must rely on divine inspiration coming through you. Don't think that you have all the answers. You don't. Get out of the way. Turn to God and ask for his assistance. And he's got all of these angels who are ready to help you. And this is reiterated so consistently by Baha'u'llah that we must consider it to be one of the major teachings of the faith, that reliance upon the Holy Spirit. That's something that will have immediate resonance for a Christian, and will give them confidence that we're speaking the same language, that we don't have ideas that are antithetical to their ideas. I'm ready for the next one. I can't, I would hand you all a cup of coffee to wake you up, but maybe that's complicated using computers. It definitely would be very messy. So if I don't get any hands, I'm going to introduce a topic of my own, okay? Simply because I think that even though you're not asking a question about it right now, that you have had questions about it. And one of the topics, I think, is that when we read the Bible, when we read the Quran, when we read the Baha'i writings, we find differences. We find differences that we don't know how to reconcile. We find, for example, that the patriarchs that are described in the Old Testament, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, come across as very human people with lots of, what should we say, imperfections, with lots of questionable judgments. And yet they are depicted in the Quran as prophets. And as we know from the writings, the prophets are regarded from a Baha'i perspective as being under divine guidance, is receiving divine guidance and not making mistakes. So how do we reconcile this? This is frankly a big problem for many Jews, for many Christians, for many Muslims for that matter. Now, there are some Muslims who believe that all of the prophets were essentially human and that they received divine guidance in the form of verses that were revealed to them, but that they were basically human and therefore there's no problem if they should make mistakes because human beings make mistakes. But then there are also Muslims who believe that the prophets were perfect in all things. They even have a term for it. They call it ismat. And when we talk about infallibility, that's what this word is. It's called ismat. Ismat. And the greatest infallibility is the infallibility of the prophet, of the manifestation. It's called ismat al-kubra. And this is described beautifully in the Ishraqat of Baha'u'llah, referred to very briefly in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, and also explained in Some Answered Questions, in one of the talks of Some Answered Questions. So this, for example, is a contradiction. How are we to resolve a contradiction of this kind? And it's an important one, because it speaks to trust, reliability. Can we really trust the testimony of people who were like us? Do we trust each other? Do we ultimately trust each other? We turn to God. We turn to the manifestation of God because we know that we are as likely to be wrong as right, and maybe more likely to be wrong because we only see part of the picture. We don't see the whole picture, and we don't have pure motives in all cases. But it's a question that we have to meditate on, we have to think it through, and we have to find a resolution, because otherwise, when we're faced with this sort of a question from our children or from the people we're teaching, we're going to come up empty. We're going to come up and we're not going to be ready to give them the kind of answer that will draw them closer, not only to us, but closer to Baha'u'llah. So I will continue on this because I'm not seeing any hands yet. As soon as I see hands, I'm going to stop talking. I think one of the ways in which we can resolve these is to see something, to understand something that is actually in the Kitab-i-Aqdas. In the Kitab-i-Aqdas, Baha'u'llah says, if you were to regard the manifestation of God as God, that's true. Because everything that the manifestation says, everything he reveals, all of his teachings are divine. They come from God. But if you were to regard him, the manifestation as a prophet, then yes, that's true also, because he is showing you what's going to happen in the future, and he has this innate knowledge of the prophet that is not shared with human beings. And if you were to regard him as a human being, that is also true, because like all human beings, he eats and sleeps and does everything else a human being will do. And this may be one of the ways in which we can understand that the prophets who are described in the Quran and then who are spoken of as patriarchs in the Jewish tradition in the Bible, First of all, they're the same people and they're being looked at from different perspectives. So the Quran is looking at them from the perspective of them receiving divine guidance. But also, the Bible is mostly looking at them as being human beings who have moments of divine inspiration. And those moments are, in most cases, very short, and they have particular boundaries. They're referring to something very specific. For example, there are not many conversations between God and Isaac or Jacob. Many more conversations with Abraham. So we can consider that Abraham was a major prophet, was a manifestation, whereas Isaac and Jacob could be considered secondary prophets at most. The most important thing to understand about their station is that they were chosen by their father in the case of Isaac and grandfather in the case of Jacob to continue the covenant that was revealed to Abraham. This is not a new covenant. Isaac does not have a new covenant, and neither does Jacob have a new covenant. The new covenant is revealed specifically to Abraham, and then that covenant is carried out, is continued, is reaffirmed through Isaac and Jacob. And so this is one of the ways to look at it, is that simultaneously they are human beings and they are also inspired by God with a certain degree of knowledge. But that degree of knowledge is not the same with every manifestation even. You know, there are verses of Baha'u'llah in which he states that no previous prophet was given the knowledge and understanding that he was. So progressive revelation is not just to us, it's to the manifestation himself. The manifestation is not given all knowledge because all knowledge is only possessed by God. It's only possibly possessed by God, because when you think about it, how would a human mind or be able to cope with universal knowledge? But the manifestations know everything they need to know, convey to us. That we can be assured of because Baha'u'llah has stated that. And indeed, you know, we here have the same teaching from the other manifestations. Jesus talks about, for example, Jesus says, I'm going to tell you what you're capable of understanding now. But when he, who is the Spirit of truth, comes, he will reveal to you all truth. But we even know all truth in that sense. Is all truth according to the capacity of humanity at that time. And our capacity is going to continue to grow. It always has, it always will. The manifestation that will come after Baha'u'llah will reveal to us many things that Baha'u'llah could not, because it was not timely. We were not ready for it. In fact, there's a passage in the Tarazat of Baha'u'llah in which he bemoans the fact that humanity was supposed to be readier for his revelation than it was. And we've certainly seen ample evidence of that because of all the kings that turned against him, the clergy that turned against him, and, you know, and basically the opposition that he received from all quarters. But this is also the pattern with all the manifestations of God. They all receive opposition. If they didn't receive opposition, then we'd know that they aren't true prophets, because the prophet is telling you a truth that you're not comfortable with. It's not going to be your garden variety. It's going to be something that really stretches you. And we don't like being stretched. We like being reaffirmed for who we are and basically approved of as is. If anything, the manifestation is challenging us to our very core to grow, to be bigger, to be wiser, to be more knowledgeable than we are otherwise. Now, we've had new people added to this group who don't know that actually I'm not supposed to be speaking extemporaneously this way. I'm waiting for your questions. So these new arrivals, Aram Abizadeh has a question. Alhamdulillah. What is your question, my friend?
Good morning, Alapa. How are you?
Allah. Good.
I caught you on YouTube as I was just getting the kids ready this morning, and I was inspired to join the Zoom. So this is my first time doing so. I'm in Ottawa, Canada, and it's a bit of a side question. You kind of alluded to it earlier around our task of reconciling the past revelations with the Baha'i faith, and one of the things that I have been very curious about and starting to learn about is exactly trying to reconcile Baha'u'llah's revelation with the revelation of Jesus. And so I will get to a specific question, which is, if we try to discern the original teachings of Jesus, we go back to the early days of, say, Jewish Christianity. And there's been a lot of discourse around at what point did Christianity take a different path that may have strayed from the original message of Jesus Christ. And there's been a lot of talk, obviously, around Paul and his letters and how that relates, and lots of Baha'i discourse around that as well. I would love your perspective on all of this to see kind of where your head is at with respect to reconciling the original revelation of Jesus and where we look for that and how that is reconciled with Baha'u'llah's teachings. This is a wide open question, so you can take us down any path you like. I'm not asking for the specific answers. So thank you so much.
Lovely, Aram. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to have a study class on the Pentateuch, on the Torah, at 2:00 Eastern time. And if you want to join us for that, my colleague Eileen is here, and we'd love to have you. And you can ask lots more questions. But to address this one, what I discovered through my own search for that occurred over the period of many years was that we were called upon by Baha'u'llah, by Abdul Baha, and specifically in English by Shoghi Effendi, to search out the original teachings of religion and not be satisfied with the way they've been presented to us, presented to believers in those religions, presented to humanity through the various commentaries and interpretations of believers. And so I've begun the process, and I've been working on it for some years, is to discern what are the original teachings of Jesus. And I have not finished the process. And because finishing the process means that you have to go through every single one of the canonical gospels and line up the references to a specific teaching of Jesus with the ones that are in all the other gospels. That's what you have to do. That's a big job in itself. Then once you find how he spoke as recorded in the different gospels, because there are different nuances. And very often in one gospel, you have part of the teaching, in another gospel, you have more of the teaching. So you have to be able to look at this spectrum of the short version and the long version, and how they interact with each other and how they change your understanding. What I found by studying the original teachings is that I'm struck every single time by how perfectly in tune the original words of Jesus are with what Baha'u'llah teaches. And this is, I was not looking for this to happen. It happens spontaneously because I feel the same voice. I feel as if, yes, so when Baha'u'llah says he's the return of Jesus, and he says that in a number of passages in his translated writings, and he says so in very clear terms, quoting the Gospels, when he says that, he really means it absolutely literally. There are points in which he's reiterating exactly what Jesus said, using the same words. Now, obviously not using the Greek or the Hebrew, but using Arabic or Persian, but still the concepts are the same. So one of the things I was quite surprised to find, for example, and I alluded to this in earlier in this conversation, was that Jesus talked about the original teaching with regard to marriage. And he said intentionally, God's intent was that partnership would happen between one man and one woman, and that they would be the basis of basically multiplying and populating the earth. And this was the purpose of the joining together of the two, and that it was intended for them to be together forever. And Jesus quotes he quotes Genesis directly, and then explains what Genesis meant. And then he also explains why it was that these words of Genesis, that this original teaching from God was not implemented. He says it was because of the hardness of heart of the people, that they could not understand it and they could not live it. And so other laws had to be prepared that would contain them so that they would not do more damage to this original purpose, but it would be contained. But he said, he was very firm about this. You have two choices. You either get married with this one person and stick with them, or else you remain single. They even called it, if you remain single, he says you become a eunuch for the kingdom of God. That means that you are following the law of God by remaining single, because you have not chosen matrimony and the responsibility of most human beings, which is to populate the earth. So I mention that because for the longest time, I didn't know where Baha'u'llah stood on it, until I was reading through the notes for the Kitab-i-Aqdas, where a portion of a tablet of Baha'u'llah is quoted in one of the notes, where it says, the original intention of God was that one person was to marry another person and remain with that person forever. And indeed, Abdu'l-Baha cites this in his prayers when he talks about marriage is not for this life alone. It is an eternal relationship that we have with a soul. And it is also, in a sense, the model of all other relationships, because all other relationships are intended to be eternal. We are meant to have our friends forever in all the worlds of God, not just this world. There's no McDonald's. McDonald's is only a corporation that functions in this world. It doesn't replicate itself in all the worlds of God. We're not just going to do stuff that satisfied us in this moment. The whole purpose of our existence is continuity, is durability, is lasting. And this is why the religion of God is eternal in the past and eternal in the future. It has that connection for us. It's guiding us through all the worlds of God. And we can be assured that divine guidance never stops. Absolutely. And once we have this consciousness of a never-ending life, changes everything. instead of having our priorities on just this moment or this day or this year, we have eternity in mind in all the decisions we make, in all the choices we make. And we realize that if I made a choice, that choice is not binding me, it's liberating me because it's connecting me with my future. And whenever we break those promises with people, we're actually harming ourselves as well as them because we're undermining their capacity to think about eternity. If they can't count on something in this world working out, then how can they count on having eternal life and staying in touch with people for an eternity? So that would be that's just one example of the kind of inspiration that comes from studying the original teachings of Jesus and then comparing them directly with the teachings of Baha'u'llah. When we do that, we find it strengthens the depth of our faith and assurance that Baha'u'llah and Jesus are speaking the same language and that they're speaking to us, both of them speaking to us. So the manifestations don't go out of fashion, let's put it that way. There's a beautiful tablet in Gleanings in which it talks about the influence of Jesus continues forever. It continues forever in Baha'u'llah, but it also continues forever through Jesus. He remains a manifestation of God, and he remains an inspiration for all time. Do I have another hand? Or would
Yes.
Arash like to ask a further question or
Could I
anything
ask
like
a question? Could I ask a question, please?
Yes, please.
Yes. I just wanted to clarify that the 11 o'clock class is going to just be question and answers, because I thought it was going to focus today on Genesis.
Oh, well, I talked about Genesis some time ago. And also we're going to be talking about in our class at 2 o'clock, I'm going to be talking about the descendants of Adam. So that's going to include Cain and Abel. It's going to include Enoch. It's going to include Noah. And then it will begin with Abraham. But Abraham will be, Eileen is going to talk a lot about of this subject as well. And then I'll talk more about Abraham next week.
Thank you. So the 11 o'clock class will just be open talk.
Well, I want to answer your questions. That's what I decided to do. And the reason why I decided to do it is because we found that we had very little time to answer people's questions in the class because we had so much material to present, and we didn't want to have the classes go over 2 hours. So many of the same people who are already taking the class are in this session. So I wanted them and other people who are interested in this topic to have the opportunity to ask their questions and to hear their voices. I remember one of the things that I enjoyed about university that I didn't get when I was in grade school or high school was the opportunity to speak. Before that, I was supposed to just sit there and listen. And then as soon as I could write, I have to write notes because I wouldn't remember everything that the teacher said. But the opportunities to actually dialogue with people, to ask questions and to to make statements. For me, that didn't really arrive in my education until really the graduate level, when I was preparing to start PhD studies. And I felt like, why did I have to wait so long? Really, do we really have to go through 12 or more years of being taught before we're allowed to say anything? And I know that some classrooms and some educators are changing this mode of education, but frankly, from what I see from my children, they're not changing it enough, and they're not changing it fast. They're still very comfortable with having the teacher be running the whole show. And I think that it encourages the exact opposite of the independent investigation of reality. And this is a really fundamental principle of Baha'u'llah, and a principle that distinguishes his revelation from all previous revelations. And one of the things we should understand is that this particular teaching is revealed because humanity has begun a new cycle of existence, one which is called the cycle of fulfillment, or the cycle, or the coming age of humanity. That's how Baha'u'llah talks about it in the Kitab-i Aqdas. We have come of age. It is time for us to investigate things for ourselves and not depend on others to do it for us. And it's going to take us, who knows how many centuries or millennia to get to understand that and to put it into practice. But we're going to try. We're going to try right now. We're going to try in our lives to do that, because that is our calling. That's our calling from Baha'u'llah. That is where we will find the joy of discovery, self-discovery. When you discover the truth for yourself, it's incomparable to when somebody finds it for you. Terry's one of the people who's asked 100 questions, but unfortunately, the poor guy doesn't get a chance to get them replied to, because we've been on such a tight schedule. So as soon as you're unmuted, go ahead.
All right. I got one question about the covenant. How does Baha'u'llah's covenant differ from that of Christ, and differ from that from Moses?
Well, so the fundamental covenant, and the Guardian talked about this, and Baha'u'llah alludes to it over and over again, and so does Abdu'l-Baha. The covenant of God is something that has existed from all time. It's a covenant that is a relationship between God and human beings, in which God reveals to us what is for our best interest. And then we understand, or it's explained to us, that if we follow this covenant, this agreement, then we're going to be rewarded. We're going to do well. We're going to flourish. We're going to grow. And if we do not, there will be negative consequences. And that's essentially what it is. That is the nature of the covenant. And then when we go, there are specific iterations of the covenant that can be traced through the Bible, that can be traced also in the Quran. I'll give you a few. One of them is the original covenant with Adam and Eve. What were they told to do? Multiply and subdue the earth. That's what you have to do. That's your responsibility. Now, clearly also, and part of this original covenant with humanity was what they were told in the Garden of Eden, which is a symbol for our earlier existence, our pre-existence. And they're put in a perfect world where everything is exactly what they need. And they're told, don't eat that. That's bad for you. But because we have freedom of will, because he made us that way. We were designed to have freedom of will. God has freedom of will. We have all of his names and attributes. Therefore, we also have freedom of will. And using our freedom of will, we chose to do the one thing that God said not to do. So there are consequences, right? So should be teaching us, this is the rule. If you break the rule, you are going to pay the consequences. And it's not as if it's not a free ride. You can't do whatever you want and not face consequences. But the consequences are positive as well as negative. So if you do it, then you have very good things happen to you. And you don't do it, it's not good. Now, another example was the covenant made with Noah. And the symbol of this covenant, as you all know, was the rainbow. And he said, this is the symbol whereby I'm proclaiming to you that no matter how bad you get in the future, I won't exterminate you. This is a very reassuring, it should be extremely reassuring covenant for us to recognize, because it applies even to this day. Those of us who are afraid we're going to all die in a nuclear holocaust really need to loosen up and understand God would never allow that to happen. It's not going to happen. We're going to inhabit planet Earth. We're going to have this beautiful, glorious civilization in the future because it's God's will. But will we mess up and cause great suffering for each other? Yes, of course we will, because that's what we choose. And if we choose to break the law, then we pay the consequences. And the consequences we brought on ourselves. We'd like to blame them on the devil, but there is no devil, except the devil in us that simply doesn't want to do what it's told. So Baha'u'llah's covenant. Let me answer this, Terry, before I answer your raised hand. Baha'u'llah's covenant is twofold. One is he's reiterating the covenant of God that has always existed in all of its iterations. And then, secondly, and this is what the Guardian calls the lesser covenant. The lesser covenant is the agreement he makes with his followers and with his two sons, his two eldest sons. Okay? Because he had an eldest son with his first wife and an eldest son with his second wife. And he said, the eldest from the first wife is the first one. And he is going to be my successor. And he's going to be in charge. And after him will be the eldest of the second. And this would have been the pattern of Baha'i governance, except the second son started immediately after the death of Baha'u'llah to disobey Abdu'l-Baha, which is disobeying Baha'u'llah, which is disobeying God. You see, this is if you mess with the plan, you do pay the consequences. And it meant that Mirza Muhammad Ali never became the head of the faith, could not be. He basically eliminated any chance of him having any influence in that way by his behavior, by his rejection of the will of Baha'u'llah and the rejection of Abdu'l-Baha. But this continued to happen. As you know, the same thing happened with people who were supposedly followers of Abdu'l-Baha, who rejected the Guardian. And if there had been other guardians after Shoghi Effendi, undoubtedly the same thing would have happened. Because there's some of us who just can't stand being told what to do, and we want to do it our way. And so we're going to have to deal with people like that probably forever. And we have to develop, like the Apostle Paul said, you have to put on the armor of God. You have to develop a thick skin. You know, you have to be able to cope with these kind of rejections of the people around you, because what really matters is what you do and what you believe. As the Guardian said, hoe your own row. That's your job. It's to do your job, not to do everybody else's job. And thank God we don't have any priests, because the tendency of human beings to want to rule other people's lives rather than rule their own is enormously powerful. And the abolition of priesthood means that we can't get away with it as Baha'is. We have no justification for doing that to each other. And it makes us have to humbly do our own work on ourselves. And that is such a great blessing that in this dispensation, when we are approaching and engaging in the coming of age of humanity, that we have full responsibility for our own lives. Next victim.
Well, I just lowered my hand. I just got one more question. What is it
Go
meant
for it.
by what was meant by the perversion of the texts or perversion of symbols? I mean, when you
Okay.
go to the rainbow, and it's just there's a great perversion going on right now, and I just leave it at that.
Yeah, well, you know, human beings, we love to take symbols from wherever we can get them, and then we ascribe new meanings to them, you know? And I'm reminding you of what the original meaning of the rainbow meant, because it's really a very important one when we consider it in our own time, not just in Noah's time. Sure, in Noah's time, you know, there's this beautiful conversation between Noah and God, in which Noah says, you know, please spare us. And he says, okay, I'll spare you and your family. But as for the rest of those people, forget it. They're done. All right. But after it's all over, he says, I'm not going to do this again. And I think that this is a lesson for us we have to understand that these are not talking about historical events that have a one-time value. They are stories that teach us deep truths that are perennial, that last forever, right? And the perennial teaching here is that God showed the mercy that we didn't deserve. And Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah talk about this. He says, we don't deserve to be treated with mercy and with love, because we make so many mistakes, because we break the laws that God has given us. And we've been doing this from day one. We don't deserve it. We must never think in our minds that we are entitled to mercy. That's an awful idea, because then that gives us liberty emotionally to continue doing horrible things, even worse things. Justice is all about understanding that there is a right way to do things, and you do it the right way, because then you receive the blessing that comes from doing the right way. Because God's justice is not just, it's not a level playing field where regardless of your behavior, you're going to get the same results. Not at all. And we understand this instinctively if we have families. You can't reward the same different behaviors with the same outcome, because otherwise children learn that they can do whatever they want and it doesn't matter. And that human being raised in that way is a danger to society and a danger to themselves. I have to reiterate many times to my children not to cross the street without holding my hands. They're little ones. And now it's become habitual. And because it's become habitual, they're coming to understand why. But they didn't understand why when they were really little. They just heard, Daddy says hold his hand, so I'm going to do it. And they would forget from each time to do that until it became a habit. There's a lot of this that goes on in human beings, is that we have to learn things, and we have to learn things through other people because we're not ready to understand why. And I think one of the great challenges of the time in which we're living is because now we're being asked to be adults. Before we weren't. You and I, if we had lived 100 years or 200 or 300 years ago, we would not be adults. We would still be infantile in many regards. We were depending on other people to think things through for us. Otherwise, we couldn't possibly function. That's what we believe. That's what all the leaders of the world wanted us to believe, right? This was the consensus among the leadership. Keep them dumb, keep them uneducated, and keep them obedient. That's what we have to do, because otherwise it's going to be, otherwise we can't live the way we want to. Baha'u'llah is so fiercely condemnatory of this old way of thinking that you understand it was never a way of thinking that was approved by God, but it was a way of thinking that was ruling the way human beings live together for millennia, maybe more than millennia. The archaeologists keep pushing back our origins. You remember years ago, they found the skulls in Africa someplace. They said it's 4 million years old. I'm sure that Eileen has come across something that's earlier than that. That's, if you really keep up with this field, you find out we've been around for a long time, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the same patterns have existed during that time. And now is the time for those patterns to break permanently, because it is when the old patterns are forced to be given up for new patterns, the new patterns are going to serve us so much better. And so this I believe is really one of the fundamentals of progressive revelation, is that progressive revelation is a relationship between our Creator and us. We benefit from the progress in each dispensation to the degree to which we listen and implement what we're taught. But we're in a new phase now. We're in a new phase because we're going to be, we have reached what he calls species adulthood. And the species adulthood is propelling us to exist in a different, to a different degree than what we were before. And so, even though we might want to resist it, ultimately we won't be able to. So it's only good. It's only good. When we look at all the wars and the hatreds and the prejudice and the stupidity that goes on in the world, we really need to just relax. Don't worry about it. It's going to get resolved, and it's going to get resolved for everybody, not just for one little group of people, And we're not talking about 5,000 years ago. There's just going to be a few people who are living according to the will of God. No, that's not happening. It might take us a few centuries, maybe even 1,000 years, but it's going to happen for all of us now, because it's time, because that time has come. I'm seeing no hands. Oh.
There's a question in the chat from Aram.
Aram, please.
Aram. He put his question in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. Oh, I see. All right. Let me look in the chat. Okay. And let's see. All right. I'm going to read. Okay. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I will continue to listen on mute. Thank you for the answer to my question. If there's time for follow-up, I would love to hear your perspectives on the Q source and the saying of Jesus, Is that what you were referring to with respect to correlating the teachings of Jesus across the Gospels? No. Okay. No, I wasn't referring to that. What I was referring to is actually identifying the original teachings that are found in each of the Gospels. And when I say original teachings, I mean literally the speech, what he said, right? And then when you find what he said in Matthew, and you find out what he said about the same thing in Mark, and then you find in Luke, and then you find in John, and there's not a corroboration of every single statement in every gospel. That doesn't exist. But in many of the gospels, in most cases, it's in at least three. Now, historians of the Bible have been saying for a long, long time, well, the Bible evolved in this way, it came this way and that way, and then first it came Mark, then it was Matthew, and then it was Luke, and John was written by some other guy. And well, honestly, they've been doing this for like 150 years now, okay? And they're coming up with new ideas all the time. One of the reasons why they came up with new ideas was because in 1945, they discovered this huge collection of non-canonical writings that were related to Christianity. And they realized that the very cryptic short references to a number of these treatises, not all of them, by the way, but a number of them, in the writings of the early Christian scholars, that here they were face to face with the whole document. They were able to read the whole thing. They were able to then compare it to what was other writings that were from the time, whether they were by Jews, whether they by Christians, or whether they came from completely different sources. Because at that time, one of the religious phenomenon that was occurring at the same time that Jesus was around, and thereafter, shortly thereafter, were the Gnostics. And the Gnostics were principally Greek derived mystical, philosophical group who had a great diversity of beliefs. And, scholars have been studying the fragments related to the Gnostics for hundreds and hundreds of years. But what they discovered in 1945 and the years following, when those documents were translated and published, was that this was a much more common activity than they thought. There were a lot more documents. There were a lot greater diversity of opinions. And then what happened in 1948 was that the so-called Dead Sea Scrolls from the Qumran caves were gradually extracted and put together and translated. And this completely astonished people because there was so much material here that they'd never seen. And this was about Judaism. This was about what Jews believed. Now, we have to remember, Jesus was a Jew, and so were all of his original followers. They grew up in a Jewish environment, and that Jewish environment had all of these characteristics that literally people didn't know anything about until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered and deciphered and translated. That's when they woke up, in a sense. And then they found other ones in Masada, and they found other ones in other locations. And who knows? We have no idea what's going to come next. Yes, I'm referring, Dee, to the Nag Hammadi. The Nag Hammadi is the name for these non-canonical documents that were found in the desert in 1945. And these documents are now easily available. You can buy a collection of translations of all of them. You can buy all kinds of books that compare them with the canonical teachings of both the Old Testament and the New Testament, and of the Judaism that expands. Every religion's got this huge secondary literature. And it's not like the Baha'i faith. The Baha'i faith is a very young faith, and we've because of the Baha'u'llah's covenant, we've stuck very closely to the interpretations of two people, of Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. But in the case of all the other religions, there was no specific successor who was going to translate and explain the teachings of Jesus. It was left to the 12 disciples. And one of them, of course, was a covenant breaker in a sense, you know, he was responsible for the arrest and death of Jesus. But the others were, you know, human beings. They were human beings with a, with a mission. They were assigned a mission by Jesus, but they were very fallible human beings. And I digress for a moment, but on purpose, because it's important for us to understand that the original Christians were no more holy than we are. They weren't. They're just regular guys. They're regular guys, you know, who are fishing or mining or whatever. They were growing crops. And then they were selected by him to follow him. And then you read the Gospels carefully and you see how many times they mess up. Peter was selected to be the convener, sort of the, you know, I want you to look after everybody and make sure everybody's okay. All right? You're going to be the cornerstone of the church, of the Christian community. Okay? And Peter messed up a lot, including at one point, he contradicted Jesus, and Jesus turned to him and said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." That's pretty strong language to the guy that you appointed to be, you know, the head of your community. And if you look at after the resurrection, he comes about and he reaffirms that Peter is still the head of the community. After Jesus predicted that Peter is going to deny me 3 times before the crow is going to cockle-doodle-doo in the morning. He says over the course of this night, it's going to happen 3 times. And then it did. Then that prophecy was fulfilled, even though, of course, Peter said, no, I would never deny you. But he denied him 3 times, and it's told in all 3 canonical Gospels, synoptic Gospels. And so we know it's a true teaching. And what does that mean? It means that, you know, this guy who was esteemed to be the chief disciple was a guy. And he made mistakes. And he made big mistakes. I mean, and he regretted them. And this is the important thing. When we make mistakes, that we recognize them and that we ask for forgiveness from God. It's the only way we grow. There's no possibility of growing if we think that we're holier than thou, we're better than other people. And so we're not ever making any effort to improve our behavior. We only improve our behavior when we recognize that we've messed up and we need to make a change, and then we do it. And this is, by the way, this is the wonderful story of Jesus where he talks about a man with 2 sons. And the one son stays home and does everything that daddy says to do. And the other son runs off and does everything that daddy said not to do. And then he comes back and he apologizes. And he's sincere in his apology. And so who gets the big feast when he comes home? The guy who messed up. Because he apologized. Because he realized, I tried to do it my way and it was wrong. I should have listened to you. And this is what God asks of us all, is we recognize when we've done that, when we've done what he asked us not to do, and then we realize our error, and then we correct with his help, correct our way forward. So when is someone going to tell me that I have to stop talking because you're going to turn off the recording? It's pretty soon, I think. I'm guessing it's 9:19. So we probably have about 10 minutes left. So Aram, you asked if should the reading of the non-canonical gospels to try to I've read all of the non-canonical gospels, and the ones that the Gospel of Thomas is the one that is really, I think, the most important for us to study, because it's talking about teachings of Jesus that are found in the canonical gospels, but that we understood in a different way from the way they're approached in the Gospel of Thomas. I think it's a very useful book to read. And by the way, Baha'u'llah talked about there being many gospels that were lost. And so this may be one of the gospels, okay? There is also a gospel of Mary Magdalene. And I love that one. I love that one because she's feisty. She's feisty. She and Peter don't get along. There's something that seems so truthful about that, because Peter was made the chief rabbi, he's in charge of the community, right? And here's this woman, and this woman has amazing spiritual insights. I mean, how else could she have known that be chosen by Jesus to reveal himself after his resurrection? She's the first one. She gets the news first, and then she relays it over to them. And then he appears to two guys when they're on the road, and then finally to the 11 apostles. But initially he chose her, and that speaks volumes about how important she was from a spiritual point of view. By the way, I've read enough of the Baha'i literature to know that Mary Magdalene was absolutely beloved by Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah had such tender feelings for Mary Magdalene, which is extraordinary. Think about it. How can you love somebody who lived that long ago that you don't know anything about? Well, because he does know something about her. He knows from her behavior and probably from the divine guidance that he received that she was this great soul who was liberated from 7 sins, or from 7 devils, as they put it in those days. And she became an absolutely devoted believer, and with no position, because this was the whole purpose of being a leader spiritually for Jesus, is to be the servant of everyone. And she demonstrated that in all of her actions. The other ones, the men had to be reminded, no, a leader is not to be the chief. You don't get to sit at the right hand of Jesus and hand out, judgments on people. You don't get any power. There's no glory in it. It's all about servitude. It's all about serving. It's all about loving other people and putting them first. And so I also wanted to say that I think that people should read also, if so inclined, read what the scholars have discovered about what they call the Ur text, which is the original text of the Gospels. But they should also read it with caution and not think that this is the last word on the subject. They're trying to understand something. And personally, between you and me, I think they will have a much better understanding of the original teachings of Jesus when they read Baha'u'llah, because Baha'u'llah explains so many things so beautifully, so clearly, and there are so many things that have been, the teachings of Jesus have been misrepresented so many times that most of the time we just reiterate the same confusions, the same misunderstandings, rather than getting to a new level. Terry, you get one more chance because they're going to cut me off.
Okay. Well, here's the last thing that I want to talk about is you mentioned Mary Magdalene. I've read stories about the possibility of her being married to Jesus and Joseph of Arimathea being Jesus's uncle. What do you know about those?
No. There's some secondary literature of course, which doesn't have the same level of inerrancy as the writings, but there are several sources for the future life of Mary Magdalene, and they are from Abdu'l-Baha. They're from talks of Abdu'l-Baha. And she did not marry Jesus. Jesus was always single. And he was single for a reason. And he explained this, and Baha'u'llah explained this about him. Says this man had no prospects to raise a family. This man had no house. This man had no place to lay his head. That's how he says it in the Gospels. He says, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head, right? And so when he was calling on his disciples to follow him, he was saying, you need to follow me, which means give up everything and live the way I live. And that is a huge, huge challenge, right? So he never married. He knew from his youth that he couldn't marry. It would be the wrong thing to do, to bring people into the world he couldn't take care of, right? But also to develop bonds with another human being that would be exclusive, because he needed to be eternally available to everyone. And that's what he was able to do by not marrying, by not having a family of his own. He became available to everyone, and everyone could have their personal relationship with him. And because it was a spiritual relationship, none of the physical bonds that are exclusive existed. And we have only to look at the Christians today and find how many of them meet Jesus in dreams, meet him in visions, feel his presence. He clearly had no place for a family. He needed to be that agent of connection with people. And it was also one of his unique attributes. And each manifestation has to have unique qualities, because that's part of progressive revelation. That's part of our education. And now I see that my friend Jeremiah has appeared with his smiling face and his palm tree behind him. And that probably means that he wants to close out this session.
That is correct. Thank you, Peter. I really appreciate these. Again, for everyone who's just tuning in, this is what I call like a pre-series to the 2 p.m. class. And that's going on for the next 6 weeks now. And it will start, that's 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we look forward to having everyone come back. One last thing of note is there is links in the chat window, so you can get to the information on the webpage that will actually have not only the Zoom links, but it will have any kind of information that Peter or Eileen want to convey to you guys. So be sure to check those out, and we look forward to seeing everyone joining us at 2 p.m.